Alrighty, so we are looking at our fitness assessments today. This is some of my favorite stuff to talk about, which is great considering that we talk about it like, we have an entire 12-day class dedicated to it, as well as revisiting it every module. Love fitness assessments. I think they are our number one tool to sort of set ourselves apart from other trainers in the gym. I think that if there are two trainers and they're both trying to get the same client, that scenario is never actually going to happen. But like if there's two trainers sort of competing over a client, and I were that client, I would definitely 110% of the time always go with the trainer that knows the most about fitness assessments, because that is the trainer that is going to look at where my performance currently is, analyze it, and come up with a strategy to get me to the next level of performance, right? So you guys know that I'm going to spend most of my time talking like postural distortions. That's sort of my favorite part of assessments. But when it comes to youth and stuff, really what we're just trying to assess for is we're trying to get some baseline data so that we can look for improvement. That's really all kids care about. We don't, for the most part, we're not going to see major postural distortions in youths. Youths are very flexible. They're naturally very flexible. Now, you start to get into like the later, like adolescent youths, where it's like it's starting to get into teens. Yeah, they might start to like develop some postural distortions. If that's the case, we need to know how to fix those things, right? So we'll talk a little bit about muscle imbalances today, but I love talking about fitness assessments because, again, it comes back down to that thing that I always try to emphasize with everybody, which is personal training in 3 steps, right? Or like the 3-step problem solving method. These are exactly the same things, right? Mechanics are going to do this. Doctors are going to do this, whatever. So the 3 steps, first thing we need to do, we need to kind of clearly identify like the problem. This could be our client giving us a goal, right? We ask a question so that we can identify a problem. Like, what is it you want to work on? We ask that question, they give us information back, boom, it's identified. Now we've got something to work towards, right? But we also have like a fitness assessment that we can take our clients through and see where their current baseline stats are. So it's like, you guys have seen this in class a couple times, like while we've been working together, Simon, there've been, not to throw anybody specifically under the bus, but Simon, we've been a couple times where we've sort of looked at, your posture, and it's like, I just have a hard time, like this type of squat, like these particular movements are more challenging than others. Fitness, if I'm assessing that, I'm going to say, oh, well, it's a really tight soleus that you've got, right? And I can tell it's your soleus rather than your entire gastrocnemius, because there's a sort of a slight difference that you'll see. Both of them are going to be tight calf muscles, but a soleus that's tight often manifests itself as the heels popping up off the ground. Whereas when a gastrocnemius is tight, it usually just results in a really forward lean. And so when we were doing box jumps, right, we kind of noticed that like we're staying on the toes, right? Actually, Julio, very similar, right? Remember, it was like, get those toes down, like get planted on the floor, get that like solid distribution there. That is a postural thing that we're looking at, right? And then like a little bit of the knees caving in thing, that's also coming from tight calves. So now the gastrocnemius is kind of back in the conversation, which is why it's like, oh, tight calves in general, right? If you look at me, when I do things, I tend to like tuck my butt, my pelvis, rather than like sitting flat like this, like front of my body, back of my body, moving like this. Mine likes to go whoop. It likes to like tuck my butt underneath me. And that's because my hamstrings are like, we got this. And then they pull really hard every single time, rather than like stabilizing and just keeping them back up, staying in full length, David, you don't necessarily, your tight muscles are like one thing, but honestly, like anatomically, just looking at like, how long and tall like you are, and like you've got a lot of like leg length, particularly in like the femur, that makes like squatting exercises a little bit different for you, where you're going to naturally have to have a little more forward lean, right?
Yeah, you explained it to me that for me, it's just like my legs are just disproportional to my body in terms of like just length compared to the rest of my body. My legs are just unreasonably long. So I'm they're unreasonably long. My legs are just ridiculously long.
So. The way that is phrased. So yeah, you have a very long femur, right? Which would have, you're young, man, get into hurdling, like I know you're like, you kind of, I know you always talk about like, fighting sports and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, man, you'd be an Olympic level hurdler. But yeah, so that's sort of a difference there, right? Like we just know there's some anatomic differences between all of us. And fun fact, I'm sure some of you have already started to do this. Cyrus, this is your first assessment lecture with us. But I'm sure all of you guys have started like doing this in your life where you'll be walking around in the world and you'll be like, that person's got tight calves. That person's got really tight shoulders. That person's got a forward head posture, right? Like you're just gonna slowly analyze and judge people for the rest of your life now. I apologize. That is just something that sort of comes with this profession. But those do mean specific things, right? That's sort of what we're analyzing so that we know what our starting point is. So once we can identify our starting point, right, then we can sort of work after we've done sort of a thorough assessment, then we can work to solve that problem. And, solving the problem in our job, if you went to a mechanic and you're like, hey, it's making this weird sound, my car is not working quite the way it's supposed to, it feels sluggish, whatever, right? Mechanic's going to do that thing that we all find very annoying, which is like, well, what does the sound sound like? And you feel like an idiot because you're like, I don't know, it's like, like you're making like sounds to some stranger. But then what they're going to do is they're going to run it through the computer, right? They're going to hook your car up. They're going to sort of run the computer and see if there's any diagnostic problem. So now they've identified the problem. And then the next thing they're going to do is they're going to go, oh, your water pump is leaking. That's going to be expensive. But your water pump is leaking. We need to like replace that, right? That's the solving of the problem. And then he's going to go, it's going to cost this much. Do you want to do it? Do you want to proceed, right? Same thing is true for us as personal trainers. Once we see someone's posture, right, and we know sort of what's going on, and it's like, we've got this postural distortion here, really tight shoulders, really tight lats, tight whatever it happens to be, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of run it through our diagnostic machine, which is your knowledge of anatomy and physiology, right? So we're going to go, all right, well, if you lean forward like this, that's probably a tight calf muscle. If you've got this excessive low back arch, that's tight hip muscles. And then it's like, okay, if the calves are tight, that means that the shins are weaker. And then if we see like the excessive or the excessive low back arch, that means that the glutes are weaker than they need to be. So now it's like, boom, we've got we've sort of solved the problem, right? We solved the mystery, right? If you will. It's sort of that Sherlock Holmes approach. So now all we need to do is integrate our solution or implement our solution, right? So this is where we train our clients, right? So, if I go to NASM's website right now, excessive forward lean, right? Excessive forward lean and a low back arch, right? This isn't quite what I wanted. I was looking for, one of their pre-made workouts just to show you what I mean quickly. Kind of. Come on, there we go. Okay, so instead of excessive forward lean, let's say our client has overactive hip flexors, right? Let's say we got a client who has sort of an excessive low back arch, right? They got the anterior pelvic tilt, right? So we know that what's causing, so now I've addressed the problem. I've identified the problem. It's like, oh, they have an excessive anterior pelvic tilt. Now I'm going to solve it by running that past my knowledge. What does anterior pelvic tilt mean? It means tight hip flexors, right? It means weak glutes, and it means a tight low back, and it means weak abdominals, right? This is why we call that lower crossed syndrome, because it makes a cross, right? Tight, weak, tight, right? So now I'm going to go, okay, well, now that's what I see. Let's talk about how to fix it, right? So I'm going to go down here and take a look. Now I've got like exercises to inhibit. I'm going to do a little bit of SMR on the TFL, a little bit of SMR on the rectus femoris. Those are going to be the two major hip flexors. So now we loosen that up. And then we're going to do a kneeling hip flexor stretch and a TFL stretch. Then I'm going to do an activation exercise for all the opposite muscles. I'm going to work on that gluteus maximus and see if I can get that turned on. So I'm going to do resisted hip extension. That's sort of like the hip thrust we did the other night. And we're going to do the quadruped opposite arm, opposite leg raise. That is a more commonly referred to as a bird dog. That also has a really good hip extension bit, right? She's kicking her leg out there, as well as like stabilizing in the core here. So Now I'm going to do 1 to 2 sets of 10 to 15 reps on that with nice long pauses. And that is going to sort of activate those weaker muscles. Then afterwards, I'm going to follow up with one more sort of more complex movement, which is an integrated movement, 1 to 2 sets of maybe a slow tempo squat to overhead press. So now they're going to get a little bit of glute action to work while they have to sort of stabilize with their core. We make it all sort of work together, right? So there we go. Now I've sort of, I identified the problem with my fitness assessment. I solved it by using my brain. And then I wrote that program out. And then I implemented that solution in step 3, right? I take the program that I wrote, give it to my client. I'm like, here's what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. And hopefully this is going to help with that low back pain, So that's fitness assessments. I always love to review that. And I always try to remind myself of that because sometimes, I think all of us are going to fall prey to this. I think every trainer is going to kind of fall prey to this. We'll whip up like a really cool workout one time. And then we're like, oh, this is great. And then we kind of get into, at least I definitely do. I get into this habit of like, this is a great routine. And I'm just kind of tempted to do that style of routine with every client that I've got. Because I'm like, oh, this was, this flowed really well. My client felt like they recovered really well. This worked really well for, Steve, right? Like whatever my client's name is. So then like all of a sudden I get another client coming in and it's like, okay, Rebecca, like, let's do this. And I put them through like kind of the same thing because like it was a really fun, really effective routine, burned a lot of calories maybe. But I got to always remind myself that like I should be basing my routines on my client's posture and goals. It really needs to be directly related and customized to them in particular. So I always try to remind myself of these 3 steps so I can go back. If I'm ever sort of like getting lazy about my program design, I can always go back and just remind myself of this. I'm like, this is how I should always approach, my training and stuff. So, probably one of the most important aspects of any personal trainer, understanding all this assessment stuff. So we do want to understand the importance of not only the objective stuff that I sort of just talked about when it comes to posture, but also all the subjective stuff as well. Remember, the first thing you're going to ask your client is like, what are they here to work on? Get an idea of like what their goals are, because you might see like a lot of postural stuff when you're identifying things, but like maybe they actually aren't really motivated by that. It's like, hey, you got a little bit of an anterior pelvic tilt. And they're like, I don't care. I'm just here to lose some weight so I can look good when I go to Maui this summer. Like, all right, cool. Yeah, well, let's do both. Like I'll be motivated by the posture stuff. You be motivated by the beach, that's still fine. That there's room for that in our sessions. But I always need to keep my clients' motivations at the forefront of what's most important, which is why we have our subjective information that we're going to gather in the beginning. Subjective information is all the stuff that we gather through like a questionnaire that kind of gives us that baseline knowledge. And then we want to sort of take you guys through how to navigate the entire assessment process, start to finish, questionnaires, and then obviously specific sort of postural assessments and things like that as well. So the fitness assessment, is always going to be like your very first step when it comes to working with any client. Doesn't matter who it is you're training, you should always do some form of assessment with them, because it's going to help you gather all the objective information in order for you to like measure progress. Remember, objective stuff is like tangible, usually number-based information, right? What is your body weight? How fast can you run a mile? How high can you jump? How much weight can you squat, right? Like these are all like number-based things. And so it's very easy for us to track progress, right? If you can do 24 push-ups the first time I ever bring you in, I train you for 4 weeks, and now you can do like, 38 push-ups, boom, we saw improvement, right? Number went up. Pretty easy. But don't forget, we also want to gather all that subjective information. I think that sometimes personal trainers put less emphasis naturally on subjective information because it's not as measurable, right? Subjective info is any of the info that you can't really slap a number on, right? How does your client feel, for instance? They feel better in week 4 than they did in week 1, right? Are they feeling improvement there? Or what are their goals, right? Your goal, you can't measure, necessarily like setting like a goal, right? You can set a measurable goal. But like asking what someone's goal is a very subjective thing, right? Or getting tell me a little bit about like what your work schedule looks like. That's data that I need, even if it doesn't necessarily like translate to numbers that I'm going to track in the future. Somebody tells me they're working mandatory 60 hours per week, and I'm like, whew, that is tough. And then they're trying to deal with like their aches and pains. I'm probably going to create a routine that they can do in like maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time on like their breaks and stuff. That is a big difference compared to somebody who might be working a standard work schedule, who has time to like, leave their house and go to the gym and stuff. A friend of mine, Amber, absolutely is like this. She works in production. She's not a set designer, but she's like the like whenever you see like a movie and there's like a plane wreck or something and it needs to look like a plane wreck, she's the one who like goes in and like does all that, right? Like she like paints stuff to make it look like it's burnt, or she puts the set together. And so she literally does work these insane hours, like mandatory 60 hours per week, lots of guaranteed overtime. She's making bank, but like doesn't exactly leave her a lot of time to have a personal life sometimes. And so when she was asking me, she's been having like some shoulder problems, and I was like, well, you're probably not going to find the time to go to the gym, but here are some exercises you can do at home before you go to bed, when you wake up in the morning, or maybe even at your lunch break. So that subjective information that I can't necessarily like use directly is still very valuable to me. A lot of times I think the subjective information is sort of the why behind the what, right? Like if the what is your body weight, then the why is working 60 hours a week, right? And having to eat out every day, rather than like being able to like prep your food. Or if the what is poor heart rate recovery and poor cardiovascular efficiency, then the why might be that they have a very sedentary lifestyle in general, right? If the what is that they have really tight shoulders and they get a lot of tension headaches, the why might be that they don't get enough sleep and they haven't like they're very tense and stressed out, right? So there we go. Now we're starting to see how our subjective stuff kind of feeds into our objective stuff. So the goal of any personal training relationship should always begin with an integrated fitness assessment so we can get the adequate data. So let's talk about these types of data, right? We'll talk about the first one first, which is the subjective data, the subjective information. So again, you think about like the difference between like objective and subjective. Subjective is very opinion-based, where objective is very number or data-based, right? It is objective that gas prices are really high right now, and then it is mostly subjective as to sort of the why behind that. I think we're all sort of arguing about why gas prices are so high right now. Those opinions are very subjective, whereas like it's like, well, the truth of the matter is we definitely know that like gas prices are very high. I can see it. It's a number, so that's sort of the difference between those two major pieces of information. So the subjective stuff that we want to know, even though it is immeasurable, is a little bit about our client's general medical history, any medications they're on. And we also want to get done with what is called the PAR-Q. So the PAR-Q is the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. This should be the first thing that you do with every single client that walks through the door. Now, for the record, you should also probably be having every single client sign a waiver the minute they walk through the door as well. But lucky for you, that's pretty much done for you when they sign up for their gym membership. So unless you're selling gym memberships, you're not really dealing with waivers. Instead, what you're dealing with is the PAR-Q, okay? The Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. The idea here is that it is going to identify whether certain activities are not suitable for our particular client that we're dealing with. If they answer yes to any of the questions on the PAR-Q, we want to make sure that they have doctor's permission before they start exercising. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't train them this day. If they say yes to something on the PAR-Q, you just need to make sure they have a doctor's permission to engage in exercise. So if you ask them, hey, you said yes to this thing, I'm not going to really be comfortable working with you unless you have been sent here under like a physician's advisement. Did your doctor tell you that you need to increase your physical activity? They say yes to that, great, we're in the clear again, right? But if they haven't been to the doctor in like a year, and we notice that like they have like a lot of chest pain, or body aches or anything like that, then it's really important for us to make sure that like they are medically cleared for exercise by their primary physician before we engage in exercising with them, right? So that's why we have the PAR-Q. So if you go to NASM on their website, under that downloads tab, you will see this little questionnaire right here. You're going to print this out for your client. For the most part, guys, I'd say 90% of the time, like 9 out of 10 clients are going to just say no to everything, right? It's like, have you ever, has your doctor ever said you have a heart condition? No. What about high blood pressure? No. Boom, 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 boom. No, 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 no. They say no to everything. Great. Make them sign it. Move on, get to the gym floor, work it out real quick. If they say yes to anything, you're going to move on to this sort of more advanced version of the PAR-Q here that is going to break things down very specifically. And then there's the participant declaration down here, which basically says like, hey, I am taking my health into my own hands. My doctor told me to come here. Didn't tell me necessarily to get a personal trainer, but did clear me for physical activity. Great. Like, I don't need the doctor to say, I want you to go work with Brad Thompson over at blah, 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 blah gym, right? I don't need that. That's not what we're saying, right? What we're saying is like, we want to make sure they're medically cleared before we engage in physical activity. So the PAR-Q's purpose is to determine whether or not the client is ready for exercise. If they say yes to any of these questions, it's really important that they consult a physician before, moving on. And once they're cleared, great, kick their butt. That's exactly what we're going to be hired for. Next part of this questionnaire is we're going to see the general or medical or whatever they're calling it. They keep changing the name on it. Medical history questionnaire, right? Let's see here. They call it the lifestyle and health history handout now. They keep changing this dang name on me. So that is the questionnaire that we're going to, ask our client a series of questions, right? Again, this is very subjective information. They've started doing a better job of like throwing some number-based data on here. So for instance, like how many days per week do you get 60 minutes of activity? Great, that's a number, right? Yeah, I can pay attention to that. On a scale of 0 to 10, how important are these goals to you? Weight loss, muscle gain, sports performance, health performance, right? Those sort of the 4 sort of key categories that we see. Do you guys notice, by the way, those 4 categories? We got weight loss specialist. That's one of our classes. That's one of our program design classes. Muscle gain is kind of also tied into that like weight loss class because it's really like body composition stuff. Sports performance, we have the sports performance class, and then like health improvement, like our senior and youth classes. You kind of see those 4 main things. Obviously, there might be something else. Somebody's just like, what's important to me is to learn how to do a pull-up. All right, cool. I mean, I'd put that under sports performance, but yeah, let's go, So there's our exercise data, right? Then we get a little bit of information about their diet, on a scale of 0 to 10, do you consider yourself generally healthy? How often are you able to control your temptations with junk food? Do you get enough sleep? What's your occupation? Does your occupation require repetitive movements? These questions are kind of weird, right? When you look at the occupation stuff, right? Why do we need to know what someone's job is? Well, for 2 reasons. Number one, it might have implications on their athleticism. But number 2, we are also trying to get familiar with our client. Remember, we've got to build rapport with this person so that we can not only get them to sign up for training, but also so that we can have a good connection so that they'll listen to us when we are coaching them. And then look at this. We ask a question like, does your occupation require extended periods of sitting? It's kind of a weird thing. What does that have to do? It's like, look, I'm just here to learn how to do, a better barbell squat, right? Somebody, I can't imagine actually wanting to work with somebody like this, but let's say you get somebody who's just really pushy. They walk through the door and they're like, you trainer, I want you to make me better at squatting. I'm like, all right, great. Let's start you with this assessment form so I'm comfortable working with you. Get them to the park queue. Awesome. They say no to everything. We're moving on, right? And then we ask them these questions about their occupation. It's like, hey, does your occupation require extended periods of sitting? And they're like, they're like, I don't know. Why do you need to know that? Like maybe there's a real Ron Swanson type. They don't want to give up any information. Here's why. We need to know that because a lot of times if they have a lot of sitting, they'll generally have very tight hip flexors. Very, very common. You know what I mean? Those two things are very much like linked together. We see tight hip flexors constantly associated with this extended sitting situation. So when we see a client with extended periods of sitting like that, we are going to sort of assume that their hip flexors are tight. So that's something we can look for when we get to the actual like assessment stuff. So again, this subjective information is the why behind the what, right? We might have measurable data when we get to the objective stuff, but we have the sort of immeasurable reason behind things in the subjective stuff. So once we get through all that, we're also going to get some questions about any medications, any past surgeries, recreations, hobbies, things like that. And that way we get sort of familiar with our client, what their likes and what their dislikes are. So does that make sense, guys? Any questions on the subjective data or, the reason behind assessments and stuff?
Yes.
Cool. Alrighty, so let's take a look at the objective side of stuff. Now, this is definitely where we spend most of our time when it comes to a fitness assessment. You think about like how long a fitness assessment should be. It should probably be about an hour, for the most part. And you don't necessarily have to get through everything like start to finish. A lot of times what I like to do is get through some of the key pieces of information that I need to whip up a really fast workout. Then I take them through and I give them a little bit of that workout. That way, like they really feel like they're getting their money's worth in this first sort of free, training session that everybody gets. And then I'll sort of like slowly test these other things individually as I, train that person, right? So it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a different process than just sort of going start to finish. But like I said, the more there's going to be a lot more categories of objective information. There's just a lot more data to gather. We got to get the cardio, we got to get the posture, we got to get the performance, right? So starting out the objective information, this is information that is typically number based. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and start off with physiologic assessments. So when I say physiologic assessments, I mean any type of assessment that is sort of related to the baseline physiology of my client, right? So this is going to be stuff like their heart rate. So when I gather their heart rate, there's a couple different versions of heart rate we need to get. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this on paint here, but first one we need to get is their when it comes to heart rate data, right, or heart rate assessments, right? One of the things that we need is going to be their resting heart rate. Okay, so your resting heart rate, that is going to be the state at which your heart is at its lowest when you are, or the state at which your heart is currently beating when you are at rest. So we want to make sure that like we are trying to get our clients at rest while we are doing this. Now, a true resting heart rate should be gathered first thing in the morning, basically before your feet hit the ground. You know what I mean? That's the real sort of resting heart rate, right? It's like you just rested, hopefully for 8 hours, I certainly didn't get that last night. But like you rest and then like we figure out what your heart rate is like when you're just sort of keeping your body alive, right? Now we can't do that in like a gym setting. You can't do that at a doctor's office even, right? So the same protocol that doctors use that we use is we have our client sit for about 5 minutes and then we gather their resting heart rate. okay? Doing stuff that's pretty much not very super physical. Guess what? This is probably the first thing you'll do, because we just spent all this time asking our client a series of questions. That probably took about 5 minutes to get through. So you can just say, all right, don't stand up, stay right there. I'm going to come around to the other side of the desk and we're going to gather your resting heart rate real quick. Cool. Now we've got an idea pretty close to what our client's heart rate is when they are at rest. Now, the next thing we need to do is calculate their max heart rate, their maximal intensity heart rate. So you guys will remember, I just got done kind of giving you the rundown on this. The sort of original heart rate max formula was very simple. It was the number 220 minus your client's age, right? I guess we're not doing that. 220 minus their age. That gives us the heart rate max. Now we're using a slightly different formula. We're using heart rate max equals 208 minus their age times 0.7. So now we're doing it 208 minus 70% of their age. You will notice that these numbers are very similar. So if I use myself as an example, 220 minus 33, that's a max heart rate of 187. Well, guess what? 33 times 0.7, 23.1, 208 minus 23.1, 185. It's a difference of 2 beats. You know, it's really not a distinct difference here. You know, it's not huge. So which formula is better? I don't know. I guess the regression formula is better. That's this one. But really they're the same. So that's like a small update that's kind of happened in the last couple of years. But that's going to help us determine their max heart rate. So we get their resting heart rate, which is again, the client's heart rate at rest. Cool. So then the next one we want to get is their max heart rate, right? And so we're going to use an estimation of their highest target heart rate. Whoop, that's nice. Right, an estimation of their highest target heart rate. For that, we are going to use 220 minus their age equals heart rate max, or we are going to use 208 minus their age times 0.7 equals heart rate max. Cool. So now we've got 2 major differences here, right? Now I know my client's minimum heart rate, which is their resting heart rate, and I know my client's maximum heart rate, which is sort of like intense effort. Now, I do know that we're calling it the heart rate max. That does not mean if they ever hit that number, their heart's going to go, right? That's not what that means. Actually, guys, if you do like a lot of intense cardio, you will often kind of go over your heart rate max if you're in really good shape, because you are very good at sort of pushing yourself really hard and your heart can kind of keep up with it. So it's fine. It's not like the movie Speed in reverse, you know. This bus goes below 58 or however fast. Like this bus is gonna explode. Your heart's not gonna be like, if I get to 200 beats per minute, my heart's gonna explode. However, if you are up that high, it will probably feel like your heart's going to explode. It is brutal. All right, so now why do we need to know all that? Well, the main reason is because what we really want to get to the heart of, no pun intended, is our client's target heart rate. This is a very, very valuable piece of information, right? Just like if I'm trying to figure out how much my client can lift, I need to know what I need to know what their maximum effort lift is so that I can target them and make them hit the right percentage of their lift, right? So if we look at like percent one rep max calculator, right? Let's say I bring my client into the gym and they can lift 250 pounds one time, but I don't want them to lift one time. I want them to do about 12 reps, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the number that instead of doing 250 pounds, right? I'm going to pick a about 75% of 250 pounds. That's going to be my target. So I look on this little calculator here, 75%, it means 187.5. So I'm going to put 185 on the bar and see if they can do 12 reps. Should be pretty close. If I can't do 12 reps, all right, I was a little bit off. You know, the math isn't always perfect. You know, in fact, the further you get from the number one, the less perfect it's going to be. Now, if I wanted my client to do 20 reps, well, guess what? I probably have them lift about 125 pounds. So that's why we needed to know their maximum lift. Same thing is true of the heart rate. Right? If I'm trying to get my client to go for endurance, I want them to be somewhere between like 65 and 75% heart rate max. So I need to know what their heart rate max is so I can make them get to that 65 to 75%. Now, the original version, so that's our target heart rate, a percentage of max heart rate at which our client will work, right? That's what target heart rate is. Now, there are sort of two versions of this, okay? There is the old version, which is just based on the target heart rate, right? I'm sorry, just based on the heart rate max. So the target heart rate is a percentage of max heart rate. The original version, it was, 220 minus your age times a percentage, right? That's called the straight percentage formula, okay? So the straight percentage formula is as simple as this. Heart rate max times intensity equals target heart rate. Should probably just do that. Right, so the straight percentage formula is your heart rate max, whether that's this formula or that formula, doesn't matter. They both give you the heart rate max, right? Times intensity. So earlier, mine was, what did we say? 187 or 185 times, let's say 0.65, that's 65%. So do the same thing, exactly the same thing. We do 187 times 0.75. So if I want to be somewhere between 65 and 75%, I would tell my client, hey, I want you to hop on the treadmill. I want your heart rate to be somewhere between 122, I'm going to round that up, and 140 beats per minute. Cool. Now my client, I just wrote them a cardio routine very easily just by doing a little bit of math and a little bit of subjective data and a little bit of objective data. Great, right? Now, you guys all know, like, well, for those of you who've been through this before, you guys know the problem with this type of formula. The only thing that it took into account, like the only data I've got here is my client's age and then like a flat number that I use on literally every single client. So it makes the problem with doing it this way is that it makes the assumption that every 33-year-old client, every 22-year-old client, whatever, is in the same shape. And so like they need the same sort of workout. So we do want to get a little bit more advanced than this. We don't want to make that assumption that everyone is exactly the same. We want to sort of have this sort of individual difference, right? So what we're going to do instead is we're going to do the Carbonate formula, okay? So the Carbonate formula is a formula that determines your target heart rate based on the difference between your max heart rate, which yes, will be the same for anybody depending on what their age is, and their resting heart rate, which will be very different for every single client, right? So this formula is a little bit more complicated, but this is a formula based more specifically on the individual client. That is the gold standard when it comes to target heart rate. Okay. And so what that means, this sort of gold standard approach here, is that it's the one that we've been using for a really long time. You know what I should do? I should put this down here, actually. So we'll go like this. All right, so the Carbonate formula, like I said, it is a little bit more complicated, okay? It is going to be, we need two brackets here, right? It's going to be your heart rate max minus your resting heart rate. So your resting heart rate. And then we are going to multiply that by our desired intensity. And then we're going to sort of close that bracket. And we got to add that resting heart rate back on because we took it out of the formula a minute ago. So we need to put the heart rate rest back in there. And all of that is going to equal our target heart rate. Okay, so now it's like the heart rate max is the same. Any 33-year-old client's getting the same number here, but the resting heart rate is what makes them individually different. Then we're going to multiply it by that intensity. Again, earlier I chose the intensity, right? 65% or 75%, 85%, whatever number I decide to choose, right? And then we tack that resting heart rate on because we took it out of the formula earlier. We got to add it back on at the end. That's going to give me a much more accurate target heart rate that's catered specifically to me, rather than a target heart rate that's catered to any general 33-year-old person. So my original version was 121 to 140. Let's take a look, or 122 to 140. Let's take a look at what my numbers would be if we use the Carbonate formula. So my resting heart rate is about, I'm all amped up right now and drinking coffee. It's usually about 60 beats per minute on average. So we're going to go and use this formula here. My heart rate max, we still know that that's like 187, right? That number gets to be the same. But now we go 187 minus 60 beats per minute. That's my resting heart rate is 127. So now I take 127 times 0.65. There's my 65%, right? And I got to add my resting heart rate back on because obviously 82 is really, really low. So I add that 60 beats back on. Now I've got 142.5. My new target is higher than my low range is now higher than my original range. And then we take that 27 minus 60 times 0.75 plus 60. And my new max range is 155. So now it's 143 to 155. That's much more catered specifically to me, who does, who does a lot of cardio, right? And that is a specific catered workout. Now, Cyrus, I think you're the only one here who's seen this for the first time today. It may seem like you're doing a lot of freaking math when it comes to like training your client. For the record, guys, the way that everyone is going to do this, whoa, is you're just going to go right here and use this Carbonate calculator. And you just need to punch in two pieces of data. What is your client's age? What is their resting heart rate? Hit enter. Boop. There's your 65. There's your 75. There's your 75, 85, 85, 95. There's our zones. It does all the math for you. You can get the app on your phone. It's in here, piece of cake, If you have an Apple Watch and it has heart rate zones on it, that's how they came up with those heart rate zones. Because in the beginning, when you punched in all your data and all your information, it asked you like what your age is. And then when you are at rest, it will measure what your resting heart rate is. So it'll just do it for you. And that's the Carbonate method. That's how we determine our cardiovascular intensity. It's just like how we do, weightlifting intensity, right? I choose, I learn what my client's maximum lift is, and I work at a specific percentage of that. The other part of physiologic information is blood pressure testing. Probably not super relevant for kids. In fact, I didn't even put like the youth numbers here, but it's the amount of pressure, ideally it should be around 120/80 for most adults. Kids, that pressure is going to be a little bit lower. We want that to be closer to about like, I think it's like 100/60. 70, 75, 65, something like that. So that is our physiologic stuff. Those are our physiologic assessments. Questions on that, everybody? That's where your assessments are going to start. Questions. How you guys feeling?
feeling good.
Is everybody still
Feeling
awake?
good. Yeah,
And
feeling
that's
good about it. It's just like you said, it seems like a lot of math, but once you learn the tricks of the trade, I don't think it's that bad.
Yeah, you literally just use a calculator, put the two numbers in, boop, boop, hit enter. You know, I just like to show you guys the math because like now you sort of know what's working behind this. You can explain it to your client. They're gonna be like, why are these my numbers? And it's like, well, these are your numbers because it's the difference between your max effort and your minimal effort. Your max effort and your minimal effort are going to be different for you compared with someone else, you know. That's why we do that. You want to get even more specific, give them like a VO2 test, you know, go put them on that mask and make them breathe there. And that's even way more specific because now it's not even making the assumption of age and stuff. It's literally just based on performance alone. All right, so next thing you're going to move into, once you are done with the physiologic stuff, you're going to head over and take your client through some body composition testing. So body composition stuff, the data that's related to that, that is going to be their body weight, yeah, obviously, body fat percentage, body mass index, and circumference measurements, which is literally just body girth, right? So the big ones that we're going to focus on with Utes are probably going to be body fat percentage and circumference measurements. Those are two of the biggest ones. We will look at BMI. Now, you guys know that, like we just talked about this the other day, when it comes to BMI, body mass index, for Utes, it is on a sliding scale. You know, it is like a specific percentile. We calculate the number the same way, you know, like it's still going to be their weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. That has not changed, but what the numbers mean is very different. So for adults, we want to be somewhere between like 18.5 and 24.9. That's sort of the range that we want to be between. But obviously, let's say we're training I'm going to say 13-year-old kid. And then they have a BMI of, I'm trying not to look at this so that I like purposely choose something. Let's say their BMI is 19. Okay, so that's in the middle of the normal adult range, right? And I said they were 12, right? So we go to the age 12, boop, and we look up to the number 19, and that puts them right in the normal percentile, right? In fact, that actually puts them pretty much dead center where we want them. That's kind of perfect. It's low on the sort of adult range, right? But it's kind of like right on for our youth, right? Now, let's say their BMI is 23. Right, so that's one number off from the sort of maximum range, right? So we go to 23 here. That actually puts them in the overweight category, even though that would be normal weight for an adult. So this is different, right? Instead, we are looking at this sort of like curvy scale here. And there is a sort of a distinct difference between how we use it. However, the way we calculate the number, it's still weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. Easy number, right? Again, you're not even going to really do that. When it comes to BMI, you're going to punch in you're going to put in their height and their weight, hit calculate, it'll do the math for you. But here's the thing about the BMI scale. I actually do think it's somewhat accurate for kids because of that sliding scale. I think that it can be a little bit more applicable. But the problem with body mass index is that it's not taking into account any other data other than height and weight. So let's take a look, for instance, at Arnold Schwarzenegger when he literally won the bodybuilding competition to prove that he was the most in shape person in the world. What was Arnold BMI when he won Mr. Olympia? Right? So his BMI when he won Mr. Olympia, he's 6'3". I think he was like 200 and something pounds, was 30.6. That is considered obese when he won that competition. Now, obviously, we're looking at it and we're like, Arnold's in great shape. And we know he was like, I actually think it's more fun to look at Arnold Schwarzenegger now than it was when he was like, you know, the most in shape human ever. Because like you look at him as like a senior now, like how old is he? He's in his 70s. 74 years old. He's in amazing shape for a 74-year-old, right? I think that, I mean, like, that's great. You know, I know it's different than it used to be, but like, I love that. I'm like, that is why we work out. You know, like, I want to look like that when I'm 74 years old, you know? So that is what we're looking at, like BMI. I don't think BMI is necessarily the best indicator of health, but it is one more piece of data. The big thing we're going to focus on when it comes to Utes, probably, or even most adults, actually, probably my favorite source of information on body composition is going to be percent body fat or body fat percentage, right? This is an individual's overall percentage of body fat compared with their overall weight. Now, there are a lot of ways that we can, and there's a lot of ways that we can calculate this. You know, there's bioelectric impedance, which is using like a little machine. That little machine basically is going to run an electric current through the body. Don't worry, it's not going to feel like it's shocking you or anything. But like it basically runs a current from point A to point B. Now, what's really cool about this is we actually know how fast electricity travels through water. Like we know at what speed it can sort of travel from point A to point B if it's going through water. So if you tell your scale that you weigh, let's say 180 pounds, it knows how much water is going to be sort of present in your body, and it's going to measure how fast that electric signal can travel. If it travels really slowly, we know that there is tissue in the body that really isn't made of water, which pretty much the only tissue that doesn't have a lot of water in it is going to be your body fat, because it's mostly made of lipids, right, which doesn't have a lot of water. So fat is an insulator that slows that electricity down. So if the signal travels really slow, we know we have a high body fat percentage. If it travels really fast, we have a low body fat percentage. So that's how it estimates it. Is it perfect? Definitely not, but it's pretty accurate. It's not bad. And then one of the other methods is going to be skin fold calipers, right? So we're going to use a skin fold caliper. These are in your Sochi bags, to determine body fat percentage by looking at subdermal fat. What I mean when I say subdermal fat is the amount of fat present under the skin, right? You look at your skin and you can see there's a layer of fat there. So the higher the body fat percentage, right? The higher the body fat percentage, the more subdermal fat there's going to be. So if we look at this sort of image here, right, you can see we basically grab a pinch and then we are measuring how thick this is, right? We know that the skin is going to kind of move around naturally, but the body fat is going to be a little bit more resistant to that pinching. And that's how we're going to sort of like, you know, see the difference between like a lot of body fat percentage or a lot of body fat and very little body fat. This seems very inaccurate. And for the record, if you do it like this, it will be inaccurate. That is not how you do body fat percentage. That's not how you use a caliper. You don't just pinch. You actually grab a skin fold and then you pinch that skin fold. So never do it like this, guys, ever, ever, ever. Always do it by grabbing and then like pulling that apart and then you pinch that grab. That is wrong. That is right. Okay. And so there's a lot of different methods out there for doing this. NASM is going to recommend a foresight method. They're going to use what's called the Dernan formula. They're going to get the triceps halfway between the shoulder and the elbow, the biceps halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. They're going to get the, let me just look that up. Dernan, all right, no. So it looks like this, right? One here at the iliac crest, one here just below the scapula. Both of these are 45-degree pinches, by the way. So you just go above the hip bone and you do a 45-degree pinch. You go just below the scapula, you do a 45-degree pinch. And then the biceps and the triceps are 90-degree pinches. Okay, so what you're gonna do you're going to add all those numbers up, put them all together, and then take a look at this chart here. Internet, come on, give me the freaking chart. There it is. You losing my mind. So you're going to add all the numbers up, right? So if it was like, let's say each of them was 10, that's going to be a total of 40. So you look at your client's age, let's say they are 13. Well, apparently 40 was way too high. Oh wait, never mind. Like, sorry, their age is over here. I was looking, at their age is over here. That's not how that works. Let's say they're an 18-year-old, right? And they have 40 folds. That is actually still too high, right? We would see that, like, their body fat percentage is somewhere above 36%. But let's say you total it up, it's like 5 on every site, 5, 10, 15, 20, right? So we go to 20, that gives them a body fat percentage somewhere between like 19.7% and 21.5%, somewhere right in between there, okay? So here's the body fat testing, guys, like the calipers, this seems really inaccurate because you might think that you can pinch too hard and stuff, but honestly, it's actually pretty good. It does a pretty good job of getting pretty accurate there. Now, what are our standard body fat percentages for Utes? Again, this is the kind of thing that will fluctuate really rapidly, but here's why we want to know this information, because now we can look further at the data and we can figure out how many pounds of body fat are on our client. And if we train them for a couple of weeks, if the goal is to improve, increase muscle mass and decrease body fat percentage, if we know what these numbers are, and we see them fluctuate, we can pay attention and see whether or not our routine is working the way we intend it to. So we take a look at like what their lean body mass is, right? Their lean body mass is going to be their scale weight minus their body fat weight. So let's say you have a client who their scale weight is 180 pounds, okay? And their body fat percentage is, let's say, 24%, right? So let's say they're 180 pounds with 24% body fat, right? So now I know exactly what that means because I can go 180 times 0.24 or 24%, right? That means that they have, when we look at their weight of their body fat, that is going to be 43.2 pounds. Okay. And then if I want to figure out what their lean body mass is, all I have to do is take 180 minus 43.2 pounds. That leaves me with 136.8. Okay, so now I've got my before statistics, right? And now let's say I train my client for 4 weeks. They've lost a little bit of weight. Let's say their body weight is now, let's go ahead and say, new statistic is, let's say 170. I've been checking how I've said 4 weeks. Let's say it is they've lost a pound a week. We'll say 176 pounds, right? And their body fat percentage has dropped to, let's say, 23.5. So they lost 4 pounds and 0.5% body fat so far, right? So now the weight of the body fat is going to be 176 times 0.235, 41.36 pounds. And their lean body mass is going to be 134.64. So what I notice about my routine is that when it comes to them like losing weight, right, they lost let's see. When they lost 4 pounds, we know that. But it went from 43.2 to 41.36. So they lost 1.84 pounds of fat, but they lost 2.616 pounds of lean mass. So now it's like, oh man, weight is going down, but unfortunately, body fat percentage isn't dropping. A lot of the weight that we're losing is either water weight, or it could even be lean mass. It could be muscle mass. So let's take a look at their diet, maybe adjust their protein intake. Let's take a look at their calories. Maybe their calories are a little bit too low, or let's take a look and see if they're really putting the effort in during our workouts, right? So we make some small adjustments and we train them for another 4 weeks, okay? So now the next after, we'll see like our scale weight is now, let's say they lost another 4 pounds this time, right? So now it's 172 pounds and their body fat percentage has dropped to, let's say 22% this time. God dang it, I need more space, right? So the weight of the body fat is going to be 172 times 0.22. That's going to be 37.84 pounds, right? And that is going to be 172 minus 37.84. Weight of lean, their lean body mass is going to be 134.16 pounds, right? So now they still lost a little bit of lean mass, right? This time they lost about a half a pound of lean mass. Whereas in the first example, I mean, they lost like 2 pounds, right? So this is a much smaller distribution there, and they lost a substantial amount more of body fat. So this is why we're sort of paying attention and learning about like what our clients, learn a little bit about like what our clients like lean body mass is. This is still very valuable information in our youth clients as well, right? Like, we don't necessarily have to look at the averages of like where their body fat percentage should be, but we do want to see if our program is effective. So we're going to do a little bit of math there as well. Again, lucky for you, there are calculators out there that will do all this work for you. Does that make sense on body fat, guys? We're going to move on to, do the composition stuff make sense? Everybody clear on that?
Yes.
Cool. Let's move on to cardio. So cardio. So now I know a little bit about my clients' health history. I know a little bit about my clients' like physiology, and I know a little bit about like their body composition. So now I move on and let's take a look at like some of their cardiorespiratory data, right? So in your regular textbook, NASM is going to primarily recommend 2 major cardiovascular assessments that are very easy to perform in a gym setting. One of those is the YMCA 3-minute step test, and the other one is the Rockport walk test. Those of you who have been through my classes before, you guys have seen both of these. So the YMCA step test is a cardio assessment that basically puts your client, every client that has ever done this, through exactly the same amount of stress. They are going to step up onto a 12-inch box. That's not true. They're gonna step up onto a step for exactly 3 minutes. Okay, so they go up onto this box, right? Every single time. Like, the protocol is going to be the same for every client who does it, right? We want to make sure that the step is always the same height for every single client. We want to make sure they also go at the same pace for every single client. So they're going to go at 96 steps per minute. You can use a metronome to make sure that they stay on the same rhythm. So they're going to step up with their left, step up with their right, step down with their right, step down with their left. So it's up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down. They're going to go for 3 minutes. Now we know that anybody who's ever taken this assessment has been given the same amount of stress because the step was the same height, the pace was the same height, and the length was the same height. Then what we're going to have them do is we're going to have them turn around, sit, and we're going to measure what their heart rate is for the next 1 minute. And we're going to see how it starts. It's going to go, and it's going to slow down to a normal pace. If it slows down really quickly, they're in great shape. Their body recovers from exercise really fast. They probably have a lot of mitochondria. They probably have plenty of hemoglobin and myoglobin, right? They're just recovering quickly. If their heart rate stays elevated and the number's really high, then that shows me that they're not in such good cardiovascular shape, okay? So this helps us determine a starting point for our client based on how quickly their heart rate returns to normal after 3 minutes of what we call submaximal stair climbing. This isn't the hardest thing in the world. You get a little bit out of breath, but it's not so intense, right? So you'll see here, this is the women's table. You use a different table for men and women because they have different resting heart rates. But let's say you got a 28-year-old client whose heart rate recovers to 116 beats per minute. So we have it over here between 26 and 35. I said 118. That's between 113 and 119. Puts them below average. Train them in, train them for a couple weeks, 4 weeks later, they're still 28 years old, but now their heart rate recovered to, let's say 109, right? So that puts them just in the average category. So we're looking for improvements over time. That's one of the reasons we use the YMCA step test. The same thing is true of the Rockport walk test, which, no, I thought that was what they were doing here, actually. The Rockport walk test is basically also a very valuable cardio assessment where you make your client walk 1 mile as fast as possible. And then you're going to punch in a whole bunch of data. It's going to do some big fancy math, and it's going to estimate what their VO2 max is, the maximal oxygen consumption of this client. And then that way we determine how well they performed on the test. So if I made Cyrus, I know I'm picking on you today because you're new to this, is your first mod. But let's say Cyrus and I both take the Rockport walk test. Obviously we have different ages, different heights, different body weights and stuff. But let's say like he gets his test done a little faster than mine. I walk a little bit slower than he does. His heart rate recovers. His heart rate at the end of the test is a little bit lower than mine. My heart rate's a little bit higher, right? Well, you punch all that data in, right? You punch in their age, their gender, their weight, and what the heart rate is at the end of the test. Punch all that data in, and it gives us both a VO2 max. Let's say his VO2 max is like 29, and mine is, let's say like 23. Right? That's going to show that he's in much better shape. He's able to consume oxygen more efficiently than I am. So again, big fancy calculator is going to be used on this. You can download a Rockport walk test calculator on your phone. It's a really valuable thing. Now, I wanted to mention those because these are the two assessments that we usually focus on with most of our clients, because most of our clients are going to be adults. These tests are not calibrated for children. They're not even really calibrated for teens, actually. So we're not actually going to use these. Again, I put them in the notes. You're not going to use them with your Utes. Instead, we are going to focus on some special ones today. We're going to do the classic PE run. We're going to make our client run a mile, and we're just looking for improvements. It's a lot simpler than the adult assessments, but it's literally a 1 mile run walk test, right? You have your client walk a mile as fast as they can, have them run a mile as fast as they can. That's going to work pretty well with adolescents. If you've got younger clients who really can't handle a full mile, great, change it to a half mile, change it to a quarter mile, and we're just going to look to see, hey, how long did it take to run that mile? Simple, it's a great assessment. I wouldn't do it in a gym. I would probably do it on a field somewhere, or a track if you've got access to it. A lot of after school programs will be around tracks, so that works. Or honestly, guys, like this is so easy to replicate. Let's say you're training somebody on like a soccer field. and be like, all right, starting point is here. I want you to hug the fence the entire time. 4 laps. How long is that? I don't know. Doesn't really matter. I'm just looking for improvements over time. You know, I don't know even the distance in that example, but I can track like progress because the field's not going to change length the entire time. Hit the little stopwatch button. They're running 1, 2, 3, 4. They get back. Boom. 6 minutes. 4 weeks later. Boom. 5 minutes and 38 seconds. Great. That's a 22-second improvement. Let's go. High five. Moving on. Right. So that is a much more simplistic approach with kids. But again, the reason we don't get very advanced with this, you guys might be thinking back to day 1, right? Physiologically, it doesn't make any sense to try to improve our clients' anaerobic power. They're really kind of only good at aerobic stuff. So it only makes sense to sort of track like the time getting shorter rather than all that other data. Their heart's going to constantly change size. Their physiology is going to shift. So like trying to track like how their heart's, you know, responding to a certain type of stress doesn't really make any sense because that stuff's going to shift around naturally. It has nothing to do with your training. It has everything to do with biology. But something that does have to do with our training is how fast they can do something. There's still some biology there, but at least it's much more directly related to training. And that's cardio. That's the cardio assessments. Checking in again. Questions, comments, concerns, guys. Oh, nothing. Moving on. So the next category we've got are our performance assessments. So performance assessments, when we're doing these with adults, generally the ones we're focused on are 1 rep max tests, or maybe like a specific athletic drill. Like we're training like a client who's, let's say, like a baseball player, right? One of the like fun tests that you actually put baseball players through, I actually can't remember what the drill is or what the protocol is specifically called. I'm kind of blanking on it right now, but it is in your sports performance book actually. But you have them rest in between every round, but you track their time from home plate to first. You track it from home plate to first to second, home plate, first, second, third, and then you track like an inside the park home run basically. And you look for improvements in all 4 categories of that, running all the bases, right? It's kind of a fun assessment. That's a performance assessment, right? It's, you know, what does it mean? Well, it just means that we're tracking data. You know, I'm not looking at, you know, how fast they do it versus like a general population. You know, it doesn't tell me anything about their heart. It just tells me how good they are running the bases. That's what performance assessments are. There is no standard table for how you're supposed to perform. Like we saw, we look at the YMCA step test, we know what a good recovery is. Like it should be somewhere between, you know, it should be somewhere in these categories up here. If you land down here, that shows us that we need to work on this kind of thing, right? Performance assessments are different. It's just you versus future you know, and it's one of the ways that we're tracking progress, right? So in Utes, the big ones that we're going to focus on, we got a couple special ones here. These 3 are going to be the 90-degree push-up test, which is literally you're going to have your client put their hands directly under the shoulders at 90 degrees, and then they have to get themselves down. Usually you do that chin thing. You're going to put a fist down. If chin can get to that, that's our depth that we're looking for. Arms going straight back. Regular old push-ups, right? Now, it's not the maximum number of push-ups that you can do, which is sort of how we normally do this. Like any of my military folks, you guys just, the way the push-up test works in like the Army and like all of them, right? It's just how many push-ups you can do, right? Like that's all it is. There's no special protocols on that I'm aware of. Okay, hopefully, hopefully, I know I got a couple in here. That is not how this works for kids. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do the maximum number of push-ups possible, yes, but also at a very specific tempo. They're going to do 1 rep every 3 seconds. So that is actually a very different way to do this. You will notice, by the way, if you try to do your push-up test like this, it will really screw up your numbers. Like if you're like, yeah, I can do like 60 push-ups, piece of cake, no problem. Try doing one every 3 seconds. It will definitely slow things down. It gets much harder. I'm not saying you have to move for 3 seconds. That's not what I mean. I just mean like, you get 3 seconds to do every rep. And so that's the 90-degree push-up test. That way, we are sort of standardizing things every time we perform this test, because you might get a couple extra push-ups if you move really fast one day and a couple less if you move really slowly another day. So by controlling the tempo, we're going to ensure that every time we assess our client, they're getting stress in a very similar way. So 1 rep every 3 seconds, as many as they can do. That's the 90-degree push-up test. I actually love about it. This is a youth-specific assessment. I use this on my adult clients all the time. I literally use this on my roommate the other day. We've also got the curl-up test, or more commonly called like the sit-up test. Now this one, we actually don't care about tempo. We are instead of going as many as possible, instead we're just doing as many sit-ups as possible in 1 minute's time. So you're going to instruct your client to go down like that with their elbows pointing forward. Elbows have to touch thighs, and they're going to get as many as they can get in 1 minute's time. The other thing you should do is when you're laying your hands down, your heel should touch, excuse me, your heel should be around your fingertips. That way we're controlling variables. Their posture is not going to change between one round and another. Or no, I'm sorry, 6 inches. That's right, 6 inches from your fingertips. That's the curl up test protocol. And then lastly, we've got the standing long jump test. That's literally as far as you can jump forward in 1 jump with both feet, right? So you use both feet, jump as far forward as you can. We're going to measure it, right? And we're going to see that slowly improve over time. So that is sort of the approach for our youth clients when it comes to fitness assessments. There's a couple other performance tests out there, the ones that are in your standard textbook, for instance. We've got what's called the Davies Test. I think this is really fun to do with kids. But that is where you're going to set a piece of tape, 2 pieces of tape, 36 inches apart. And then what you have to do is you have to, there we go, reach over and touch one hand to the other as fast as possible. And what you're going to do is you're going to get as many touches as you can get in 15 seconds. So I would start like a 15-second timer. This video is 17 seconds, so it's kind of perfect. And we're just going to count how many touches this guy gets. So 1, 2, 3. He has to return to the tape. 4, 5, 6 in between every rep. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you get 14 touches, right, in 15 seconds time. That is, is that good? Is that bad? It doesn't matter. It's them versus future them, right? He has to return to the piece of tape every single time. This is an upper body agility and upper body stabilization test. If he has really bad stability in his shoulders or really bad core strength, he's going to have poor agility in his upper body. That's going to make this test harder. So we can test him on day 1. We can test him on day 2. This is a really fun test to do with your clients. It's a really challenging thing. This is maybe a really good short-term goal, especially for a youth client. I will say, probably don't use 36 inches if you're training like a kid. Change it to 24 inches. But the original version of the test is 15 seconds, number of touches, 36 inches apart. Oh, and then do it for 3 rounds. So you're going to test round 1, round 2, round 3. And then the other one is going to be what's called the shark skill test. And this is actually where you're going to have your client stand in a 3x3 grid. This is lower body agility here. And they're going to stand on one leg and they're going to jump from box to box to box. Now, the box should be 12 inches by 12 inches. This box in this video is massive. I do not know why it is as big as it is. That is definitely like 1.5 feet in comparison. unless this is just an exceptionally small human being. So this box is bigger than it should be, but he's going to jump into every box and return to the center every single time. And we're going to measure how long it takes him to do it. So if he gets through the whole thing really fast, that's going to show that he has a really high amount of like lower body agility. If he goes pretty slow, that's going to show that maybe he struggles with his lower body agility. Again, there's no standard table for how this is performed. We're just testing him versus future him. So those are our major performance assessments, and they're good. They're really fun, you know. But the big one that we want to get to is our posture assessments. This is probably the #1 indicator of like how to write our workouts. So we got a couple different posture assessments out there. There's a couple different versions. The main one that we're going to focus on is the overhead squat assessment, right? So the overhead squat is a fitness assessment where our clients will squat with their feet shoulder width apart, toes pointing straight forward, arms elevated with their biceps in line with their ears, okay? And so the idea here is that you are going to have your client stand feet shoulder width apart, toes forward, arms straight up, and they are going to squat to about chair height. So they're going to go straight down. And ideally, what we want to see is we want to see their knees stay in line with their toes. Let's say they squat and then like their toes shift like this. Their knees buckle in, their feet turn out, they end up like that. What that shows us is that they have a limited range of motion in certain joints. The reason they have that is because certain muscles are really tight. The muscles on the other side are so weak that they're not pulling. So then we do from the side, like my anterior view, not so bad if I do say so myself. I usually don't have too many postural distortions from the front. But from the side, you will notice if I do this, I will get like a butt tuck at the bottom, right? Watch my pelvis as I get low. You'll notice that I round my low back at the bottom. It's like my butt is trying to kiss the floor. That is the tight hamstrings, right? My hamstrings are pulling too hard. My hip flexors are not pulling hard enough, right? So that's what that means. This is why we look at this. So we're going to pay attention to some very specific joints while we're doing this. So I want to show you just a little video here that's going to kind of highlight what we mean. Just to sort of break this down and have like a good understanding of how the overhead squat works and what it is for, you know, what specific joint actions be. We'll go over the specifics of these things more in other classes. But let's see here. Where's the is it this one's the one I like for this class? There's like I show a million different overhead squat videos. I'm trying to pick the right. There's the one I want. I do think it's this one. Hopefully I didn't goof this up.
What's up, guys? Joe Drake here with the Accent Fitness Academy, and I have my lovely model,
Josh Gangware.
and we're going to go through the overhead squat. So one of NASM's bread and butter assessments. Not only going to be a big piece on the NASM exam, you know, obviously you guys are studying, want to do well there, but also really a great way initially to understand movement as a whole, right? You get a lot of different pieces going on in the overhead squat, which is why it is a great tool, and we're going to break it down to different pieces from there. So what I'm going to have to do, and I'm going to explain it to you guys just like I would if Josh was in here training with me today. So Josh, what I want you to do is I just want you to stand in a position that you would feel comfortable squatting in with your feet, and I want you to go hands up overhead, and I just want you to take your time, sit back and down as deep as you can comfortably in a squat, and just go through a couple of reps for me. So the way we do that initially too, guys, is you know, for me, I like to give enough cueing but not too much right away. I want to see naturally how would Josh sit back and squat. Now there may be a point in time here, and Josh, you can come up top and pause for a second. If you can see right away that the person just needs a little additional cueing, cueing is going to be different than something actually wrong with their body or like an overactive or underactive muscle, right? So if they've never squatted before, okay, it might not look great. So I may need to give a little bit of coaching in order to really understand if there's any type of movement issues there. But then from there, what we're going to do, and I'm going to have Josh go through a couple more, we're going to start from the ground up, right? Because that's where all forces in the world come from. So before anything else, we're taking a look at Josh's feet, all right? So as he goes down into the overhead squat, we're just kind of keeping an eye on, do his feet cave in, and also do his toes turn out. So just a couple simple things that we're looking at. And you guys can see for Josh right now, that's actually pretty good. In the perfect NASM model, maybe they'd be directly forward, but just slightly out a couple degrees is fine. And Josh, turn them way out for me. So what we're looking for more is if we see someone go way out, right? So if they start to really, really point those toes out, and that's going to be something that we're going to want to take note of. And Josh coming back up top. So if someone does that, what does that mean? Well, we may need to do some more tests to really understand that. But a lot of times what will happen is if someone doesn't have enough ankle dorsiflexion, meaning maybe they've got some restriction or some overactivity in the calves, then what they'll do is they'll rotate out so that we don't have to use as much of it. So potentially some issues with the ankles there. Again, we don't know just from this, but it's all about giving us information. So the other thing that we're going to see from the front side as Josh goes back into it is taking a look at his knees and really just looking at the path of his knees. So as he goes down, do those knees pretty much track over the top of his foot and maybe even more specifically like that second toe, big toe area? Or do they kind of cave in at the bottom? Thankfully we're seeing Josh has pretty good, but Josh, point those knees in at the bottom for me. So maybe oftentimes you'll see with clients if they're not used to squatting, or maybe they're, have some overactivity, underactivity, we might have those knees cave in a little bit, coming right back up. So again, just information. It's not going to tell us exactly what's going on, but potentially if we've got that, we call it like a knee valgus, we've got those knees caving in, that could be maybe some overactivity in the adductors, meaning maybe we need to do some foam rolling, maybe a little bit of dynamic stretching, which we'll get to that. Or potentially, they might not be firing the glutes as much, specifically the glute medius that helps to externally rotate that femur. So again, for right now, just focusing on seeing it. You might not be able to make the decision in the actual training session on like what's going on, but it's all about getting information when we're doing the assessments. So those are our first two. And really those are the main things that we're going to focus on from the front. Now don't forget to, it really is all about the big picture. So although we're breaking down these different pieces, I also kind of want to look and see and say, okay, is this person going to be able to squat safely? And also what kinds of squats am I going to have them do? So it's all about finding what exercises you're going to use with that person. So that's it from the front. What we're going to have Josh do is turn to the side now as well. So now looking at the overhead squat from the side, I'm going to have Josh do the exact same thing, hands up in the air, again, normal, comfortable position he would squat in, and sitting back and down as deep as he can. And we're going to do the same thing, guys. Path of looking at things, we're going to look from the ground up. All right, so we may not see a lot going on here, so Josh, come back up top. The only thing we may see from this point is maybe Josh's heels come off the ground a little bit onto his toes. That could be one of two things. Again, initially it might just be a cueing issue to have him sit back more. Or we might find maybe they do have some tightness in the ankle and calves, and that's the only way they can get down there. So right now Josh is looking pretty good. The other thing that we're looking for as he holds here is we're looking at relatively perpendicular lines of his back and his shin. So Josh is pretty close there, not bad. Again, many clients aren't going to be perfect, but what we're looking for is any gross differences between those if we saw two lines. So Josh, go ahead and give me one more all the way up and then back down. And we're just moving our way up, right? So we looked at that. We see a little bit with the angles there. And the next thing we're going to look to, Josh does a great job here of keeping like a nice neutral position in the spine. Some people you're going to see either maybe a big anterior pelvic tilt in that low back area or tucking under of the hips. So Josh is pretty balanced here.
Josh, that was not an anterior tilt. He just did a lean forward. An anterior tilt is where like the arch is really intense. Their chest will be like perfectly upright, and they'll have like a really big thing here. I think he assumed what he was going to say. He said something else.
Here, so you don't see it, but that would be an area that we'd be looking for as well. So Josh, go ahead and come up and then come back down for me again. So you guys have quite a few things from the side angle that we're really looking at, all right? So we see that there too. Josh has a pretty good torso angle, but the next thing that we'll kind of start to see is you can see relative to Josh's torso angle, the arms are a little further forward, all right? So again, do we know right away what that is? Maybe not. Josh can come up, but keep those hands up, Josh. So oftentimes for some what will happen, and I can tell this is probably with Josh, he's got a lot of upper body muscle, is that tightness in the lats and maybe overall tightness in the shoulders prevents him. So he can keep those hands up overhead, but as he drops down into that squat, those hands kind of fall forward a little bit relative to his torso angle, right? So that's telling us right away those lats that come and insert up into the inside of your humerus may be, again, we don't know, but that might be what's limited in there as well. So coming all the way up top. And that's one reason why we do it with the overhead, the overhand, squat, is that it does give us that full body picture. Of course, we could just do a normal body weight squat, but we wouldn't get that shoulder action as well. So you'll find that one to be pretty common with a lot of clients. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look from the backside. So not a lot different.
So you're not actually going to look at the backside until you get to Mo's class, but that is sort of a simplistic breakdown of like why we do the overhead squat, right? It will tell us a little bit about what muscles are maybe overactive in our clients. So those are really tight muscles, or what muscles are really underactive. Those are our weak muscles. So we have these we have these 5 key kinetic chain checkpoints. We're going to pay attention to the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, and the cervical spine, like your neck, right? Those are the 5 key areas that we look at when it comes to posture. So when we have somebody do the overhead squat, right, our big compensations that we're going to look for, first one we're going to look for, we're going to start at the foundation. We're going to do an anterior view at the ankles. We're going to look to see, do the feet turn out or do the feet flatten? Flattening means they're sort of collapsing in this way. Turning out means that their toes are just like moving like that. So those are going to mean specific things. So if we actually need to remember, we know the anatomy the more we practice this stuff and the more we look at it. But if we want to use like a little cheat sheet here, we can go type in like, this is in your textbook in the assessments chapter. It's in the youth manual. It's also available on NASM's website if we look at the overactive muscles here. So if we just look over here from the anterior view at the foot, and we see the foot turn out, what is probably overactive are the soleus, that's a calf muscle, the lateral gastrocnemius, that's another calf muscle. This one makes a lot of sense considering that the lateral gastrocnemius is actually what turns the foot outwards. And the biceps femoris short head, which is this little short hamstring muscle in the back of the thigh that attaches to the same place as the lateral gastrocnemius. So this is your biceps femoris. The short head is just this portion of it right here. It's this little tiny one right here. And it runs to the back of the outside there. And if we look at the lateral gastrocnemius, right, that's this little calf muscle right here. So the lateral one, actually that's better. The lateral one would be this outside bit here, this outside bit here, right? So now we see that biceps femoris, which was inserting right here. You can see there's the edge of it there, is attached to lateral gastrocnemius. Those two muscles are probably working together to pull the toes outwards. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to strengthen all the opposite of that, right? This writes my workout for me. Right now, I just wrote my warm-up, right? In the very beginning, what am I going to start my session with? I'm going to SMR the lateral gastrocnemius and the biceps femoris's short head, right? So I'll probably get a little foam rolling action in the calves and in the hamstrings, primarily on the outside lateral portions rather than the inside portions. So I'm going to put that in my workout. I just wrote 25% of my clients' workout, right? Then I need to strengthen the underactive muscles on the other side of the joint. So I'm going to work on the medial gastrocnemius. That means I'm going to do some strengthening exercises for the inside calf muscle so we can turn those feet back to neutral rather than letting them turn out. I'm going to strengthen the medial hamstring. So rather than being on this outside hamstring, I'm going to get into that inside hamstring. And then my gracilis, my sartorius, and my popliteus, all 3 of those are knee stabilizer. So if my client's feet are turning out, chances are there's some instability in the knee there, so that they're trying to just like stabilize, but they really can't do it very well. So they just turn their feet out, then they don't have to worry about that stability. So I'm going to incorporate some balance exercises into my routine to work on those stabilizers. I'm going to strengthen the inside calf muscle, my medial gastrocnemius, probably by doing maybe like a calf press, but rather than like, people always do that calf press when they're in the gym. Do you guys do this? You do like 5 this way, you do 5 this way, you do 5 that way, right? Or like 10 or however many you do, right? You do this version, that version, that version. Well, if my client's feet already turn out, I'm going to kill this version. I'm not doing that. I'm doing straight on or maybe even inward a little bit. And that'll get the medial gastrocnemius. And then I'm going to do an exercise for my hamstrings. Maybe I'll do like a floor bridge, right? Which is that hip thrust going straight up. Very good for my glutes, very good for my hamstrings. But if I really want to get the inside hamstring, I'm just going to go ahead, do a little bit of a hip thrust with adduction. So I put a squishy ball in between the thighs. I pull the toes up like this. This toe action is going to put more emphasis on the hamstrings already, but then squeezing the ball, that's going to mean that I have to use the inside portion of my thighs to make that happen. So now I'm getting the medial hamstring activated rather than using my entire hamstring. And that is going to hopefully get my client's feet from turning this way back to neutral. So that's the purpose of the overhead squat, right? It tells us which muscles to use in which various scenarios, right? I look to see if the feet turn out, that means one thing. If my feet flatten, that means something else, right? That's actually not on this list. That's in the corrective list. But that's going to mean a weak shin muscle and then also tight calves. The calves actually, it means the same thing calf-wise, but the underactive muscles rather than the hamstrings and the calf is going to be the anterior tibialis. That's a shin muscle. So then let's say my client, I look from the, I continue with my frontal view, right? My anterior view, and I see that their knees cave in, right? Well, that's going to mean something else than like my knees caving out or something like that, right? So I go back to my list and take a look. Knees caving in, guess what? The overactive muscles there, it's the adductor complex, right? The adductor complex, those are the muscles on the inside portion of the thigh. Of course, those are the ones that are squeezing my knees in. So when I'm squatting, rather than my glutes doing the work they're supposed to, or my quads or whatever, right? My adductors are trying to do all this work. So they're overactive. There's that biceps femoris short head again. This muscle, by the way, is like the devil's muscle. It is overactive on like every list. So again, I need to stretch my adductors. I need to stretch that biceps femoris short head. My tensor fascia latae or TFL. That's that hip flexor that we were rolling the other day when we were in the gym, right? The one off to the side of the hip. I need to stretch that out. And then the vastus lateralis, which is actually a quadriceps muscle that rotates the knee inward. That's the outside portion of the thigh right here. So now all these muscles that are caving my knees in, I'm going to foam roll them and then I'm going to follow them up with stretches. That's half the equation. Then I've written my warm up now, right? SMR this, static stretch that, right? Warm up is written. 25% of my workout's done for me just by doing my overhead squat. So again, we go back to that 3-step process. I'm identifying the problem. When I look at this table and I write that into a routine, I have solved the problem. Now all I need to do is take my client to the gym and implement the solution, right? So there's our overactive stuff. Then my underactive stuff, here's my core, here's my balance, here's my reactive. I can get these underactive muscles turned on before we get to the gym, or before we get to the main gym floor, right? So my gluteus medius, my gluteus maximus, my vastus medialis oblique. That's my butt muscles. That's my outside quad muscles, right? So best way to activate that, honestly, a floor bridge would work again here, but this time I can go ahead and keep my toes down because I'm focused on the glutes rather than focusing on the hamstrings. Or maybe I might do like a single leg balance exercise, right? Like a step up to balance would be a really good way to work on that VM up, right? So now I've written half my workout, right? I got the warm up and I got the movement prep done. All I have to do for the rest of it is like, let's do chest day, let's do the rest of leg day. So again, overhead squat has different implications depending on what the posture is. We got the low back arch here. That's a very common one, right? Tight hip flexors, weak glutes. We have the excessive forward lean. Also tight hip flexors or maybe tight calves, weak glutes, weak shin muscles, right? We got the excessive arms falling forward, tight lat muscles, tight chest muscles, weak upper back muscles. Right? You might be thinking, wait, isn't the lat part of our upper back? Kind of, but it's really much more part of like the low to side back. I'm talking like weak rotator cuff, weak rhomboids, things that pull our shoulders back this way. So there's our overhead squat, right? It's this assessment that allows us to sort of look at our client's posture and see which muscles are being used improperly so that they're developing overactivity. They're getting used more than they're supposed to. We need to stretch those muscles out. And we take a look at our weak muscles that we need to spend some time strengthening and getting back into a neutral posture. This is not where this is supposed to be. For the record, there's some more advanced versions of this as well. There's the single leg squat assessment. Right? That also has postural implications, but it also has to do with our balance, right? Ideally, this is what a single leg squat should look like. He's squatting down, he's in alignment, right? Just like he's supposed to be, rather than any of these variations that we see here, right? This is tight adductors and weak glute muscles. This is a tight QL and a weak core. Same thing here, just on the opposite side. Big differences there, right? And then lastly, we've got the upper body posture assessments, like our pushing and pulling assessments, right? What about like neck distortions? We talked about the cervical spine, right? If we see our client, reach forward with their head, like this version here, we know that the muscles in the front of the neck are too tight. They're pulling the head forward, right? If we see the shoulders raised like this, we know the muscles on the side of the neck are too tight. So we've got a lot of different posture assessments out there. Luckily, we have all kinds of tables that are going to help us address those. We're going to analyze that posture. That's mostly what we spend the next 2 modules looking at. Is understanding that posture. So before we're developing an exercise program, right, we need to take our client through this whole fitness assessment process. We're going to learn a little bit about their body composition, learn a little bit about their cardio, learn about their performance starting points. And in my opinion, most importantly, we're going to learn about their posture. And that posture is going to tell us, should we give our client a Romanian deadlift? Should we give them a regular deadlift? Should we give them a squat? Should we give them a sumo squat? Should we give them a lat pull down, or should we give them like a seated row, right? It indicates which exercises we're going to choose based on their posture. I got a client with really bad rounded shoulders. I'm focused on rowing movements, right? Rather than like pull down movements. I think those are good too, but right now I need to work on the shoulders, right? I got a client with an anterior pelvic tilt. I'm going to stretch their hip flexors. I'm going to do a lot of glute stuff. I got a client with a posterior pelvic tilt. I'm going to try to strengthen the hip flexors more and stretch out the glute stuff, right? So those are 2 opposite problems. Might have 2 clients that are very similarly aged, similar lifestyles, but they just have different postural distortions. They're going to get a different workout each. So that is it. Summarizing everything up, we definitely need to know all the different components of the fitness assessment. We're going to start our client off in the beginning with a PAR-Q, take them through the general history questionnaire. Their heart rate's nice and low, so let's get that resting heart rate. Take them over and do the body composition stuff, and then eventually move them through posture, movement, and performance assessments. And these are all just kind of pictures that sort of go with those things. And that's about it, guys. We are on to the weekend. How y'all feeling?
Feeling good about this. I like the NASM approach things because everything's just so simple. And in our textbook, it goes over everything. It goes over everything and how it should be done. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of practice with this with Mo, by the way. His stuff is really built around like, you got to be able to recognize this in your client. So Mo's going to give you a lot of assignments where it's like, hey, Mir, you got a client with an anterior pelvic tilt. What do you do? And then you're going to sort of come up with a program for it. He's going to show you how to use the tables to literally just plug exercises in.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Dion, you got a question? Mir, you got a question? How you guys feeling?
Good. I'm good.
Yeah, I think it's the first time I've ever seen you relaxing at home, man. You're always at work.
I'm actually working out. So
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Love that. Cyrus, how are you doing? This is your first time seeing this stuff. How do you feel? I'll take it. Yeah. All right, fellas. Well, let's get you all out.